This is the first time we've done it here. This is my new office space, the Cannon, and this is the first time we've done this class in probably 2 years, or a class. We used to have personal in-person classes all the time, and of course, you know why, everything got shut down, we stopped. We were essential workers as construction, but not that essential that we could actually have events, so we stopped. And so it's been a couple of years, and there have been a lot of changes in those years. And so I figure the first place you need to start is understanding blueprints. I've run into a number of situations. People come to me and they actually start asking the questions about blueprints while they're building the house, which is in and of itself not a bad idea to ask questions, but hopefully you'd know the answer to that maybe way before you asked me, what's this thing? Oh, it's a wall. It's a wall that's shown right there. So when that happens, I want to put things in a perspective everybody can understand and know to start understanding the blueprints is really the place to start. Let's see. All right, well, then the burning question, what are blueprints? Actually, the word blueprints comes from back when they used to print these things with ammonia and ink, and the prints would come out blue, and they would smell like pneumonia, would knock your hat off, so they stopped doing that.
I did that in high school.
You did? So you were to blame. But it was very strong. And but they were blue. I remember going with my dad to his architects and getting blueprints all rolled up, and they'd smell up the car all the way home. It was terrible. But that's the origination. One thing I want to point out here, it does say it's a two-dimensional picture. And really get that, because the people that I work with, I would have to say 10 times out of 10, when the house is actually 3 dimensions and right there in front of them, they're amazed at what they see then. Because on 2 dimensions, you just can't see it as it turns into 3. So keep that in mind. And there are ways that you can look at it. Some designers have 3D options on their design programs. That will be reflected in the cost that the designer charges, because that software is not cheap. I was talking just the other day, there's a company that does renditions of interiors. So they can draw a rendition of a kitchen and have it look 3-dimensional. They show the cabinets in perspective. It gives you an idea of the layout of everything. So I make my clients aware of that option while they're designing. It depends on the person. Some people want that, others are just fine as it is. But a little bit about Blue Sky. I'm brand new, so nobody should know who I am. But it's a consulting company that works with people that want to build their own house. And my belief is putting the knowledge out there, and letting people get the knowledge about building a house. That's what I'm all about. So that's why I have these free classes. So you can come to as many of them as we send out notices on. But, okay, in a project, and this is a generalization for any project, that communication is absolutely key. I run into too many clients that said, well, I was thinking about that, but I didn't mention it to the designer. And I said, okay, there's the issue right there. You should always, no matter what, there are no dumb questions. Just ask the designer whatever you want to ask them. Because 9 times out of 10, it will be an answer that you need, and it will lead to other answers after that. So it's always a matter of communication. Keep your consultant in the loop. That's me. So you figure out how to get in the loop. Little glossary, we handed one of those out just to give you some idea of some construction terms. Once again, I'm really surprised number of times, when I'm just talking construction, because that's the language I know, and I use a word and the client has no idea what I'm talking about, like soffit. That was the first time it really hit me. I said the word soffit and I said the word fascia, and those are really kind of very specific things. If I say overhang, people know exactly what I'm talking about. So gave you a little glossary of terms. One of the things about communication is if a word is used that you don't understand, immediately ask. I even do that when I'm talking to people out in the street or when I'm in meetings and they say something that doesn't is not absolutely clear to me, I ask the question. So that's what that's all about. There is a particular nomenclature in blueprints, and it's not consistent, is what I see. I see some designers saying things one way, other designers saying things another way. Like a cathedral ceiling, for example. This may not be an actual real world example, but I've seen cathedral ceiling, and then another might name it peaked ceiling. So, when you see the terms, ask what they are. Another one of my rules, I've got the rule book right here in my back pocket, is don't, make assumptions. You know what they say about assumptions, right? But anytime you're assuming you know what they're talking about, that's probably a good indication that it's time to ask a question. Get it clear. Let's see if I have any things on here. At door sizes, look at cladding. In general, I say that the more things that are noted on the plan, the better the project's going to go. Not everything's going to be labeled. I mean, there's some designers that label floor coverings, other designers that don't. So you'll see carpet, tile, wood, but some don't. My opinion is they really should, so ask them to do it. And if they push back, well, that's probably a question you should ask them up front. What are you going to provide? Will you do this? Will you do this? Will you do this? Me, when people are sending me their plans during the design phase, I'm looking at them for what's labeled and what's not labeled. If I get through this quick enough, which I'm going to try to do, I'm going to bring up a plan I'm working on right now, and I brought a copy of it too. It's over there. But they have a section in the house that's on one of the pages, and it's a typical section. It really doesn't relate to the house wall at all. So it's a little confusing. You got to watch those things. And when I'm talking to designers and I see stuff like that, which I did in this case, I immediately called the designer and said, what is this wall section here for? And I'll show you. None of it that's labeled on there really relates to the house. So he should at least label it a typical wall selection. Just those words, typical wall selection, tells me it's typical of construction in general, it's not specific. So there's very few designers that will draw the wall to your house in specific detail. But, okay, this is going through what is actually in a set of blueprints. At the minimum, the site plan, that's what you're looking at right here. The very first thing the designer does is he takes the survey you have on the property and maps it onto the lot dimensions that you provided with the survey, and to see how it sets on the property. When you're in a rural setting, when it's a wide open space, it's not that big a deal. It's not a concern. It's more about where exactly you want to put the house, and not encroaching on the front line is probably the biggest concern you have. And that's pretty cut and dried. That's easy to miss that line. But when you're in the city, there's lots of lines that need to be accounted for. This particular house, he's tight. He's real tight on that property. But he was flooded out, he had the house torn down, and then he redesigned a house on that property. So I can guess that house takes up more room on that lot than his flooded out house. But this is what the designer does too. At first, he lays it out. There are a few lines on here that were actually concerning. It's this line right here on the outside. I think it's 5 and 20. That's what they call an aerial easement. Those things show up on your surveys. So all you do is supply the survey to the designer, and he will draw that on there, and you'll see how that aerial survey affects the house. It's a 5 and 20. The 5 is the width. So it's an easement that goes 5 feet this direction, and that doesn't necessarily mean it encroaches or ruins how the house sits, but the 20 refers to where the easement starts. So 20 feet up is what that means. So an aerial easement means 5 feet out from the property line, 20 feet up. If a part of your house is in that space that's 20 feet up, you're encroaching on the easement. Anything 20 feet and down, you're fine. So that's why this house is set over here. The slope of this roof, goes this way. So he ducks underneath that 20-foot line. So his roof isn't anywhere near that 20 foot. So that's a lot of detail. That just be aware of that. Question every line you see on your survey. Ask, what is this? What is this? What is this? This is the front building line right here. BL is building line. And of course, the house the bulk of the house is sitting right on that line. Most places will let you put your porches and your steps in front of the building line. They just want the main part of the house on or back of that building line. Now, as a builder, I really like a little bit of wiggle room. They didn't put much wiggle room there at all. I mean, they crammed it in there. And that's a whole different subject about getting a form survey done, especially on a house like this. When the foundation guys come in and lay down the perimeter of the house, just this line right here, have the survey company come in the day after and don't do any other work until you get that all figured out. They do this form survey and send it back, and everything is sitting in the lines as it needs to sit. So this was an interesting house. Even the city of Houston was complaining that we were encroaching on different things. And it was, anyway, I won't get into that. It was quite a debate. But when you have tight fits like this, get the surveyors involved. That's the main point. Okay, the next page, of course, is the elevations. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
What was the UF on there?
UF? Probably UE. That's utility easement. I'm going to guess it's UE. We've got some other slides that show this stuff a lot better. When I put a plan that's on my computer here, I think we'll see a lot of things. But if it's UE or UF, there isn't a UF, but UE is utility easement. Okay? But in the plans, you should have the elevations. And again, this is 2 dimensions. I've had a number of people build in Bel Air, and they come to me and say, my house doesn't look the same. It doesn't look anything like the picture. I said, well, that's because you're sitting, the perspective of this picture is you hovering above the ground at about 15 feet, and nobody does that. So when they'd come close to their house, they'd stand out in the street, and you got this crawl space. They'd be looking up, and their house doesn't look anything like the picture. Well, that's the difference between 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions. So just notice that. I find so many folks, almost everybody I work with, they're very tuned into the elevations. They may not understand much of what shows on the layout, on the blueprint. The elevations, though, are right there. Everybody knows a visual, and they know when the visual's off. So elevations are important, but they're not the end-all, be-all. Here's the back elevation. Now, usually designers will put much less detail on all the elevations except for the front. So this kind of runs into each other. It's hard to read those. I'll get to some others that we can actually read. That's a side elevation. Of course, this was like I said, it was a flooded house, so it's showing the crawl space underneath the house. And then once you get to the garage, you don't put a garage on a crawl space without causing severe problems. So it's down at ground level. So that's why it looks different. You see the crawl space here, you don't see it there. Again, the 2-dimensional viewing of this, it can really throw you off because you can't see the little nuances of depth. So again, that's good for a certain thing. The trades that are working on the house, they can read all that stuff. And there's probably some detail on there that you won't use, but we'll have to get to some plans where the detail is much more easily read. But of course, then we get to the floor plans. Now, different designers do things differently. Some designers will put all the dimensions, all the notes on one floor plan so that it looks like that. Personally, I like everything in one place, but other designers will not label the interior doors and give you a window schedule on another page. It's a personal preference. If it was my personal preference, I would ask them to put everything on one page because I don't like turning pages. But it's a very individual thing. But they label the doors no matter what. That's the second floor. Well, that one off to the side there, the far left, that's a typical wall section, I believe. I don't see a label for it. Typical? Okay. Oh, yeah, it does. All right. So again, that word tells you, okay, typical wall section. It's not specifically mine. So some of the things you'll see in here just won't be built out on the job site. You know, it really comes down to the question, do you even need a typical wall section? You know, if somebody's building a house, they don't know what a typical wall section is, that's a problem. But anyway, I'm kind of thinking out loud. Then you got the electrical layout. Again, I'm working with some folks right now in Pearland. They wanted to get with the designer and specify where all the plugs were. I said, well, you need to let him do his work because he does it per code. So let him do his plug placement, and then if you want to add some stuff, go in and do that after that. We're going to get into some of the nomenclature things when we get the bigger plans, because sometimes designers label these things very odd ways. But I don't know if anybody put a question down on their cards. We'll grab those. Any cards to, oh, there's one. Thank you. Okay, let me see. Okay, yes. As a matter of fact, the question is, does this information apply to remodeling? Yes, it's like on steroids with remodeling. Those designers really need to draw details. I have a remodeling plan in here. If we have time, I'll show it to you. They've got to draw the new stuff on top of the old stuff. And show how both of them work together. When you're doing things new, you're just drawing a brand new structure and it'll be put up the way it's put up. But in remodeling, you have to tie in, let's say a roof with an existing roof, different things to think about. Good question, good question. Okay, here's more information that goes on those plans. The first floor electrical, you saw that. These notes, I always recommend reading those notes. It's another thing, it's like a typical wall section. Unfortunately, designers hit, they have these things in their computer. What do you call that? Boilerplate stuff. And most of these notes are just boilerplate stuff, and you might read through these and it has nothing to do with your house. But it's good to know, it's good to read that, and then you can give feedback to the designer. You can say, well, I read this in the notes, what does that mean? And let him either tell you or let him tell you, oh, those notes don't really mean much. We just put them there. I've had designers say that, and I just kind of laugh. I say, okay, take them off. You know, if they don't really need to be there, then let's make this thing simple. Anyway, that's a little editorial comment there. But then the electrical symbols. Again, I recommend you read through those. Different designers actually draw different symbols. Not that badly, but they do sometimes change, and you might not know what a symbol is. That's never a bad question. Always ask those questions. Here's some more symbols. Again, you could actually look at this page and the previous slide and probably find some differences there. When I show the real plans up on the screen here, you may see some of these things and you may not, but the labeling of them is what's important. Make sure you know what those labels mean. And there's more things. When you get down to these ones down here, like T and cap. Okay, I'm glad they had a word there because that's not intuitive right there. So it's good to always know what's showing on your plans. I'll be surprised if you ever run into this union thing. Floor drain, absolutely. Vent through roof, not too often unless they're describing where your direct vent fireplace is going to go. Many times they'll put that direction on there. But again, that goes back to the communication. If that's something you want, tell the designer to draw it on there. At least once it's on the plan like that, it will tell everybody that's starting the work that, hey, eventually there's going to be this vent running through this direction, so pay attention. And it may not speak so much to the trade that's working, but to the person doing the job, doing the project management. They want to keep that in mind. Let's see. I don't know why I had that slide. That's just kind of a throw-in page right there that designers may put in there. It's just to say that this is what the house looks like, and we're not doing any of the engineering, but it does. It's a title block. That thing over there on the far right that's perpendicular to the house, whatever. It's not the same direction as the house. That's called a title block. Again, a lot of times those are just stamped on the plan and it's not ever used, but there are places to put numbers for, revision dates down here. The sheet, what sheet number it is, that can come in handy when you look at not elevation, but cutaways on different plans. It'll show a line going through the plan and it'll be labeled A7 or something like that, which that means you go to page A7 and you look for the cutaway. Those can be helpful, usually to the framers. Okay, this is what I call a real throwaway page. Those are all the details. Again, if any of those details apply to your house, that's probably an accident because there's just a whole lot of boilerplate information on here. Is it good to know? Yeah, it's probably good to know in terms of being, a builder. But some of this stuff specifically for your house is probably not going to apply unless you're in the city of Houston. Then some of those things are really what the city of Houston wants to see, because they want to know that if they give you this permit, that you're going to do what's shown on this plan. And then they try to back that up with the inspections that they do. So that's a little bit of the politics of that. But again, some of these details are applicable, like the stairs up there in the middle at the top. That does show the basic layout of a stair. Most framers can put in stairs without ever looking at that, that's for sure. So that detail page is a bit of a throwaway. Now that's the foundation right there. That's not the design. Well, it is the design. If you look over on the far right, you see the BEC over there. That's the engineer. So this is the engineered foundation. When you get blueprints, when I use the word blueprints, I'm meaning a full set of prints, the design and the engineering. Put those together, you got a full set of prints. But in Houston, well, probably everywhere now, because I recommend everybody design a house that has been engineered for foundation and structure. This is for the foundation. We'll get into more particulars of those. There's that title block again, turned to a direction we can all read. But that does have a lot of information. Now these symbols here, you see the one on the right, well, both of them are really symbols of designers. AIBD, that's a designer symbol, which is very different from an architect symbol. I probably have some architect symbols, but I've got one on this plan right here. This was done by an architect. The difference is, let's see, there's a star in the middle and it says architect around the outside. So if you want to distinguish who's doing the work, you probably have figured that out before they started doing the work, because the prices are very different. And I'll just leave that to different people to talk to. A designer's prices are, let's say, cost effective, that's a nice way. But they charge less than architects. If you're going to do a very complicated project and the architect will put the time in and do the detail, it's probably worth using an architect. But I can count on one hand how many architect plans I've used in my career. 5, probably. 5 or less, it's not much. But is yours designer or architect? Architect? Okay. Well, I didn't say anything that was too crazy, did I?
No, but there's a little bit of history there, and we actually came out better with him.
Okay, good. Well, I want to hear about that. Here's more general notes. Again, that is, like I said, very general stuff. If you want to dig into that, it's always great to learn the terminology and come up with different questions. But this is some engineering notes, I think. That's what it looks like. So even the engineer's notes are, well, they're much more detailed to the individual plan. They're down there talking about drilled footings, slab on ground grade beams. Now that number 5, 6 mil poly, yeah, they put that in all the foundations, so that'll show on the details. So that's a distinction. There's a page for details that actually show cutaway things of your beams and your slab, and then there's details like written details. To me, the details that are showing the slab cut in half are much more important. So, anyway, we're getting to the end of these PowerPoints, and then I can bring up the actual plans in real life here, and then we can actually start looking at some of these I have on tables. So, and first I'll answer any questions that have come up. Again, that's me. I work with owner builders. I encourage you to give me a call and just ask me what's going on and what might be your first steps, because that's the important thing, that you're not taking too many steps ahead and might have missed something before you got to that step. Okay, oh, and then we got this guy. He's telling you, don't throw your money away. Let us help you. So we're getting like Mattress Mac a little bit. But this is just a little plug. We are going to do more classes like this. The next one will be Foundation. Don't quite know what date it will be, but we're going to be tightening up and getting the process working much better. So that's my contact information, and I can bring that back up at the end of the presentation. But let me get on to the the showing of the plans. Bringing up some actual plans here. So bear with me while I do this. Okay, maybe I should. That's a problem. I can't even see that stupid cursor. Anybody have any questions while I'm trying to get this to come up here? Okay. My tapping doesn't work nearly as good as my cursor does. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas all the architects I've spoken to are based on a percentage of construction costs.
Uh-huh.
Do architects ever price their services similarly to designers, where it's a fixed cost
Well,
based on the square footage?
I'm used to seeing those things. Is that the way they quoted yours?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, designers charge on cost per covered foot. Now, the architects that he spoke to wanted to charge on the price of the project, which, I don't know. Per square foot?
We
Okay.
interviewed a bunch of architects, and some of them were on a percentage of the project, but the one
Okay.
we chose was per square foot.
Per square foot. Okay. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You'll find all sorts of stuff.
Actually, most of them would do for fixed cost, they would do for covered area, not the living area. So they can add the garage, the porch, the balcony.
Yeah. Well, I guess the point is everybody does it a little bit differently. So consistently talk to the ones and make sure you're comparing apples to apples. I mean, Lord knows that applies to building projects. If you're going to put something out to bid, well, that's a whole new class, right? Of how to work with builders. Let's see. Oh gosh. All right, let me get this turned right. This is a site plan. This is kind of going through the actual real life blueprint, actually a black and white print. But those are examples of site plans right there. As you can see, this site plan had a lot more wiggle room than that one in Houston. So it was a lot more fun to lay this out. I still went through the process of having a surveyor come out and measure that form to make sure that we were far enough off the front and far enough off the sides, but it was more for the client having a visual of how their house sat on the property. It wasn't for watching out for building lines. So always something comes up. So I always say get a form survey, especially if you're financing the project. The lender will require a form survey. So just think in terms of, hey, that's what we're going to do no matter what. Form, yeah, F-O-R-M. And form refers to the pieces of wood that the foundation guy sets up to make the perimeter of your foundation, which we'll probably get a look at that pretty soon. Those should show up pretty darn good right there. If anybody can see something that they question what it is, please speak up. Because that's how we get this interactive stuff of what's going on with these plans. But a couple of things I want to point out is the nomenclature that's going on these plans. If you look at the back of the master and what's shown as windows in the back, can everybody read what the windows are on the very back? That's kind of a test question, but that's how windows are shown. Of course, two-dimensionally, that's really all they can do. And they're called out, the size, 6050, I think that reads, or maybe it's 60. But that's the nomenclature for window sizes. Okay, it's 4 foot by 6 foot. And the width is always named first. It's always the width and then the height. And that's the same for interior doors. If you can see some of these interior doors, well, this is an exterior door, but it's the 3080. And that's a 3 foot wide by 8 foot tall. And it's a pocket door, so that gets it into even more detail. Everybody knows what pocket doors are, right? Everybody loves pocket doors. They're an issue sometimes, but they do save space. A lot of people like pocket doors, but it's shown here as 6 feet wide because the edge of the pocket door comes back here. So the framer does a complete different frame job when he's roughing in for pocket doors. Just wanted to bring that up since it's a nomenclature that some people know and some don't. This particular designer, he labeled this as a calf ceiling. Who the heck knows what calf ceiling is? Oh, thank you. Yes. I mean, some would look at that and not know what the definition means even. So that's very good, but that's it, wood tile, and that's very specific. That's what this client wants to put throughout the house, wood-looking tile. So it's not saying we're going to put two different coverings there. It's the same thing.
Cathedral ceiling the same as vaulted ceiling?
Yeah, it can be. He put cathedral ceiling and he put slope. So he did some extra detailing that can really give you a visual of what it is. Like I say, if they had sent me the plans and it didn't say slope on here, I probably would have gone back to the designer and say, can you just pluck that out and put it right there as a detail? Almost like there can't be too much detail, and which is another little point. If you get the chance to sit down with whoever's going to build the house, the framer, when he's going to start, and show him these different things and talk about them, that's always a plus. That's the communication thing. This little designation right here is cutting the house in half. That's a cross section, and you should see it on the next page. If I can get over there. This is the second floor. This is kind of interesting. I don't know how. What this is actually showing is, if you remember, the first floor was pretty spread out. Well, you didn't see the whole thing, but most of the second floor is centered on top of the garage and over a bonus room area, over the garage, and it doesn't go across the entire house. So that's what this is showing upstairs. These walls are shown as just dashed lines, almost like it's proposed. But of course, once we started construction, proposed turned into let's have it. So that's all framed in now. Well, I see why they put those things there. The dotted lines also, I mean, they're labeling this as unfinished. It's not a bad designation to do on a plan. I'm just thinking of the confusion it causes out there in the bidding world. You know, when it's called unfinished, then no, nobody bids it. But if you sit down and say, well, we're only thinking about it being unfinished, then you go ahead and bid it. See what it does to the overall project. So while that does communicate what that area is, in my mind, it actually makes more confusion than anything else, at least for the workers. You handed workers these plans, they wouldn't build any of these walls upstairs. They would build this one wall right here, and then this one right here, and that one along the stairs. So anyway, I like giving workers very specific guidelines. It creates less management issues for you, for the builder. So the clearer the plans, the better. But as I say, most people start out going, this is going to be unfinished, but it rarely ends up unfinished. So a little bit of reality is always good. And now here are the elevations of this property. Let me see if I can get it all on the, that's still showing up. Yeah, it's still showing up nicely. Again, this is the thing that I look at consistently while the framer's working. If the house going up in a skeleton structure looks like this, I feel comfortable that he's put all the pieces together the way it's supposed to be. If there was something done out of place, I can almost guarantee it would show up at this stage when the owner steps back in the street and looks at the plans. So when I go to jobs, I'm always looking at the plans and making sure they conform to what I see on the elevation. If it doesn't, then you just find out why. Here are the notes they put for the elevation. Let's see. Engineer of record to provide all foundation and structural details as needed? As required. Thank you very much. Had too many pixels right here in front of me. So that's a standard designer note that all they're doing is drawing the pictures and putting the dimensions in and showing it all to fit as a building structure. The engineer is going to do the details. The engineer is going to put on the structural items that are needed. I can show you an engineered drawing on this house. I think I have it over there. If you wanted to look at the engineering and the architectural right next to each other, you can see what the difference is looking at them. People building their own house, they certainly need to understand what's on those engineered drawings. To some extent, you don't need to know the actual, the real nitpicking details, but the more questions you ask about the engineering, the better. And those do get into quite a bit of detail work. Let's see, the rest of there's some more elevations there. Then the title block down at the bottom, right here. Again, important information here. It's telling you the scale of the plan. If it's not 1/4 inch equals 1 foot, they've got it on some scale that's not typical. 1/4 inch by a foot is a typical scale. Is that what the architect used, was a quarter per foot? Busy. But that is the typical scale. If you see something different, you need to ask the designer why. That goes into a whole different conversation of when you make copies of those plans. You need to know what kind of scale you want to show up on those plans when they're copied. And when I say you want to verify the scale, is when the thing is printed out in that format or this format, you can get a tape measure and you can put it on a measurement on the house. And if the measurement reads 10 foot, you should see 2 1/4 or 2 1/2 inches on your tape. That's called scaling a plan. Most construction people, framers, foundation people, plumbers, will scale the plans. Nothing wrong with that. You just got to make sure the scale they're using is the scale that's reflected on the sheet. So 1 inch, 1/4 equals a foot is the scale you want it to read. Then they can easily read it on their tapes. Does that all make sense? Okay. Now the designation on this house, can anybody tell me what the cladding is on this house? The particular name for it? There you go. He's been around. Yeah, this is what they call board and batten siding, which is separate and distinct from horizontal siding. Of course, everybody knows what horizontal siding looks like, but this is vertical. This is board and batten, where they put the pieces of board together and then they run a 1x3 batten over the seam so that you don't see a bunch of seams. Personally, that's a pretty pleasing look to me. And then, of course, when it's all painted, all that kind of fades into the background. You get a little bit of relief of the board and batten effect. Which is another item. When you're working with a designer, you want the exterior of your house to look like exactly what you want the exterior of your house to look like. These folks wanted a tiny little wall of brick down at the bottom and then siding the rest of the way up. So that's a very specific detail right there. One thing I can point out here, because I love to critique plans when I'm looking at them, if you look at this elevation, is there any way there's a brick wall across the opening of the garages? Well, it's possible. Could you get into your garage if there was a brick wall in front? That's what the elevation shows, right? So I catch things like this. To me, that's just a designer that didn't take the time to have the physicalness of the job correspond with the elevations he's showing. Okay, those are the kind of things I look for. Not that anybody's going to get too confused about that, because as soon as they put a brick ledge in front of the garage, somebody's going to say, you can't put that brick ledge in front of the garage. It'll get itself worked out. But I see things like that. They jump out at me as the designer kind of taking a nap with that. I know I may sound a little picky about the plans that get produced, but I mean, it's priceless. Workable, detailed, informative plans can make a job much, much easier. Now, I pointed out that cross-section line on the floor plan, that big line that went up and down the whole thing. That's the picture of the cross-section right here. So he had this because inside their living room, their family room, is this vaulted ceiling, which goes underneath the ceiling of the roof itself. So there's two structures framed there. You can't even get that perspective until you have a cross-section to look at. If your house has lots of cathedral ceilings, or cath ceilings as they like to say, ask for some cross-sections, because the cross-sections will bring everything together for the framer. Here's a typical wall section. I'll move down this a little bit. I just had a texting with my framer this morning. He's calling and saying, there's 1x6 shown on the plans. And I'm asking him, where does it show that? But right here they say 1x8. So I'm testing him. I know what the plan says, but I also know this is a typical plan. Another way you can look at that, I know it's not specific. Look at these overhangs and look at this overhang. There is a dimensional difference. There is a radius difference. I don't know what you call it. They ain't the same. This is a sloped soffit. It's coming straight down. The overhang material on the bottom of the soffit is going to come back up at an angle. That's not what's shown here. So again, that tells me it's a typical. Could this detail be used somewhere on this plan that's not shown as a detail? Well, yeah, probably, so we can use it then. But it's useless for things like that. And I realize all of that from my discussions with the MTO, the material takeoff worker, the estimator. He called me and said, hey, the overhangs are shown sloped, but the typical shows flat. And I said, ignore the typical. So we talked for an hour or so about how to do the material takeoff on that kind of soffit, which is a little bit different. It's not put together like this. But that's a discussion for the framing class. So just be clear that when it shows us a wall section, you know, this guy just says siding wall detail. Again, can you see my cursor moving on that? Okay. Just says siding wall detail. Again, it doesn't say typical, it doesn't say specific. The assumption process here, you would assume, gosh, maybe it applies to the house because there's board and batten siding all over the house. But then when you look at the soffit overhang, it doesn't conform to what's shown on the house. So then the question comes up, is this detailed or specific? Where it came up for me is when my MTO guy, again, he called, and you see this little detail down here at the very bottom where it shows 2 plates bolted to the foundation. There are many instances where you would put 2 plates in a brand new construction. And I can get into many details about that, but let me just tell you, that's not a typical detail. So again, this is not a typical, well, it is a typical wall section, but it's not applicable to this house. Because the MTO guy called me up and said, are you going to double plate the base plate? And I said, why do you ask that? And he said, well, it's shown on a detail. So I looked at the detail and I said, no, they never talked about doing that. You do that sometimes when you're going to have a screed wood floor, if you all know what those are. Typically, you either drop the floor or you double the plate. And you're getting the same 1.5 inch space, either way. It's technical discussion for a whole nother class. But again, this guy puts typical stuff like stair details. Those stairs probably, I mean, there are no, what do you call those, rounded stairs in the house. They're just straight up, turn, and then straight up again. So maybe that detail refers to this stairway, or that stairway refers to the one in the house. But bottom line is, I could talk for hours about the different things on plan details, but the point of it is get an explanation on everything you see on your plans. I mean, you almost can't ask too many questions. This particular designer did interior elevations, which was nice. This area right here, this family room, that's basically a little elevation drawing of the cutaway of the house that I showed earlier. It's got that vaulted ceiling inside the living room. Cabinets on either side of a fireplace, 2 openings right here on either side of this spot. These kind of details are good because it told the framer where to put this ridge board here at the very top of that cathedral ceiling, which, as I say, was built below the ceiling of the house proper. So you've got this big tall ceiling up there coming up in an A joining, and then inside the house you've got this smaller ceiling underneath. It's a lot of space usage. It's a nice name for it, but it creates some problems. The AC guy is going to have a problem running his air ducting from one side of the house through those 2 small little spaces you see, those triangular spaces on either side of the slope, to the other side of the house. But that's a topic, I guess, for another class too, right? The HVAC class. I'm looking at all these things, the point of this, I'm looking at all these things as the plans are coming to me and the way they're being designed. Immediately I come up and I tell the folks they need to start talking to an HVAC person now about how this is going to work. And it will work one way or another, it's just how it's going to be laid out and what kind of systems you're going to use. So there is more information on these elevations than on some of the floor plan stuff. Again, mostly elevations tell you the height elevations of different things. This height is saying the height of the cabinets. The ceiling goes all the way up to there. Let's see. Oh, there's the electrical. I could do this. There's the electrical. Again, that's a pretty standard layout kind of thing. They have these templates in their design programs. They just overlay it and hit a button. Now, there isn't a heck of a lot of work to it, I don't think. And I've never done it, so I could be lying. I don't know. But this is the typical electrical layout. As you can see, got a boatload of recessed lights. All these little things are recessed lights. If you want to verify that, you come over to the legend over here. And this one right here is recessed can light, which looks just like all of these here. Now this one may be a ceiling mounted. That's not typically too important unless you had some specific desires about different fixtures you wanted in different places. And then that's a matter of talking to the designer. After he's laid out the basic electrical, then you talk to him, hey, we're going to use, good example is, let's say those aren't there. We're going to use pen lights over this island. So the designer comes in and he draws pen lights here and designates them as pen lights. These are designated as something I can't read, but let's say they're pen lights. He should have it named exactly what it's supposed to be. Okay. That's the electrical for the first floor. Let's see. One thing that's looking at, yeah, they'll show outside plugs. Those are code required. And code required to me, really, it refers to everywhere. Some people think because they're in the county, because they are in the county, there is a little bit more flexibility, let's say. But that shouldn't push into the code requirement type things. You do everything per code, whether you're on the moon or in the country or in Houston. Okay, here's the upstairs again. It's interesting, they labeled it all unfinished, but it looks like a lot of finished stuff is going into it. What's the deal? As I say, when trades look at this, electrician looks at this, his work's obviously in there. If you looked at the floor plan, the framer's work obviously wasn't in there. So those kind of off readings, now maybe it's me, maybe I just pick up on off readings, I don't know. But somebody trying to put the house together, it'd be a nice question to have answers. This is a bird's eye view of the house called the roof plan. This helps the framer mostly. Sometimes I take a look at this just to make sure the elevation I'm looking at matches what I see here. So, maybe some people can look at the elevation and know that it matches this. I don't know. It's a perception. I don't know if it's automatic or not. But this is one view of it, a bird's eye view, and then you got the elevation view. These little designations right here, 2 and 12, 2 and 12, 2 and 12. Now maybe you'll run into one that doesn't say, here's one, 4 and 12. Okay, that's the pitch of the roof. And those are always good to have. Any designer should put the pitch of the roof on every piece of the roof. Okay, this part of the plan right here, this is kind of a hybrid foundation and plumbing plan. These are really good to have. If your designer will do this, I highly recommend doing it because it has the plumber be able to locate his drainage lines precisely off of this. Typically, they don't do these automatically. So if you haven't asked him for that and the plumber's out there getting ready to work, he'll want the engineered plan, he'll want the floor plan. And he'll have to take his scale out and try to measure where, for instance, this toilet over, in fact, I don't even see no wonder he said he couldn't do it. This little powder room right here. This may not even be the foundation one I was talking about. But in fact, let me find it. Sorry, I got off on a different thing. This guy did produce a foundation plan. Well, darn it. I guess he didn't. But I'll tell you, designers can actually take this foundation plan and put a dimension on where this fixture needs to sit, that drain, where this commode needs to sit, and then the plumber just goes out and he lays it out per the fixture drawing. So it's really called a fixture drawing, and it's laid out on the foundation plan. So let's see. Okay, and this plan is not in the same stage. The one I just showed you was a totally finished plan. This one's in a preliminary stage, and the designer just puts a heck of a lot of information on the preliminary. There's the floor plan. This is a totally different house, and this is the detail I looked at first, that cutaway, this elevation detail right here. It calls for these lights way, way up. They're probably 12, 13 feet high. What that means is she's got a roof that comes up to about here and then goes straight down and sits on these walls here. And she's got these open lights, these open windows up at the top. I call it a clear story effect. And she did this on purpose. Let me see if I can find her site plan and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Yeah, this is her site plan. She's out in the country, out in Flatonia. Got a big piece of land. So this is actually, the street is up at the top, and her house sits way back here, and you can't see a directional, I don't think. This is the east side over here. So those clear story windows are facing east, and the sun will come up here and come in the windows. Then as the sun gets up here, it'll stop. And she wanted that, so she specifically set it up. So that's the kind of interaction to have with the designer. If you're out on a rural piece where you can move things around, look at the way the orientation is, the sun orientation. That's really the only sun orientation she gets is in the morning. It'll come in her windows in the morning. By the time it gets up here, it doesn't directly shine into any window on her house. Pretty interesting.
Patrick, since
Yeah.
we live in Houston, we're the northern hemisphere, and the sun's always kind of south of us.
Yeah.
The south-facing windows are the most important as far as into the house.
Yeah, south and southwest.
Okay, south.
Yeah. Because it gets tricky, because you want a lot of that southwest sun in the wintertime coming in the back of the house. But I think in this climate, really concentrate on orienting your house to the summertime. The winters, not much to be concerned about most of the time. Most of the time. Okay, yeah, this is a relatively small house. A very prominent description of the footage is always extremely necessary. So they got the living area, the garage, everything's pretty well lined out what it is. Different trades calculate their prices off different footage numbers. This is the elevation, pretty cool elevation. You can see the break right in the middle right there. This is the east side of the house. The sun's going to come through those clear story windows. And I don't know who these people are over here, but somebody lives out in Flatonia. She's got all these odd-shaped windows. I guess trapezoids are the best way to describe them. Very common windows. I guess when my dad was building houses and I was growing up with him, our house he built in 1954 over in the Meyerland or Willow Meadows area had windows just like this, just like that. It was actually a lower slope. So anyway, I don't know the exact name of the design, but she really liked it. I think it's a great design. But again, you can see she's got sloped soffits out here too. It won't be an overhang where it comes straight back to the house. It'll be built just like that because that's a prominent feature of the look of the house. If she did flat soffits on the outside, it would totally change the look of the house.
Those are like completely custom windows, something like that, right?
The trapezoids are, yeah.
Big price increase when you
We're going to find out. She's in the process of getting bids right now. My job as a consultant is to give them some advice and then maybe look at another step we can take to really make it, hey, this is a real thing. And the price of those windows is top of her list right now. She's just starting to design this, so the thing to do is find out what those windows are going to cost. She probably won't change the size or the shape. She's told me that numerous times. I said, okay, get a price. Let the price do the talking. I won't do the talk. And it's not my place as a consultant to tell her she's paying too much for her windows. She wants those windows. When I look at that house, and we'll see the back of it, the house is just amazing. I think it's a beautiful house. Of course, I grew up with those kind of windows. Now, this is funny. She doesn't have all the windows in the back that she did the other plan. Let me get that other one open. Darn, she changes these plans on me. So let me show you this elevation in the back. Yeah, now she's got this windows she really wanted in the back. And they're all trapezoid up there. What I ran into here was the designer kept pushing back saying, what you want is too expensive, or what you want is very expensive. She's looking at me, okay, and what? And people in hell want ice water. So I finally called the designer and said, will you please just draw what she asked for? Just draw what she asked for. She's got to see it. You're talking blah, blah, blah about this and that is meaningless. Draw it, let her see it. She'll be able to take it to a window manufacturer, and he can measure those windows. He'll know exactly what the size is. So that's the process she's in right now. She's basically sat back, said, I want to get a solid answer on these windows first before I move forward. And so that's what we're doing. So, boy, that was a long answer to that short question, wasn't it? We will know next week. They've been all over the map. It depends on the brand. And I'll certainly get those together and let you know the price difference. Yes, ma'am.
Did she come to you with this? Already, or you helped her design?
Now, she came to me with some pictures. There was a house in Austin that looked very similar to this. So it's always good to have some pictures. Some people come with something sketched on a napkin. But, to have an idea is good. Now, if you're just in the idea gathering portion, I would suggest you can go to plan websites. Oh, God. And look at the floor plans and the plans that you like. Just use it as an idea gatherer. Don't pick a plan off a website. They will send you something that's got a basement. You go, what the hell do I do with this? It's got a basement. Well, you paid $500 for those plans. It's usually doesn't turn out well. What I have done with this designer is they just get an idea. They see a plan in a plan book. You can make a copy of it and bring it to the designer and let him put things together. He won't do an exact copy of it. There's copyright issues. So you have to change a plan, an elevation, and aspects of the plan. 15%, I think, is the percentage to get out of the copyright issue. So it's not a difficult thing to do at all. To me, there are a limited number of floor plans and elevations out there in the world. Somebody's not going to come up with a completely different one. He might, but it's not very likely. It's like plots on stories, There's only a certain set number of plots out there in the world. And only science fiction writers come up with different plots. But anyway, no, she just had some ideas. She brought it to the designer, and this is what he's working on. Now, the question's really good because there will be some back and forth going on. And that's where she finally called me and said, this designer won't do what I want him to do. So, okay, well, I don't know why. I don't really care. I just called the designer and say, do what she wants you to do. Draw it so we can see it, and we can send it to be priced. That he understood. Okay. And he felt like he was off the hook. That was great. But there are those clear story windows that are facing east and nothing else. And that's the back, and then that's the other side, and that's the front. And again, when I see these kind of design things in a plan, right away, two things I saw there. The roof, the metal roof, they cost a lot. Be happy to price the metal roof when we're doing your budget. So we do that, and the composition roof so they can see the difference. And I have a pricing template that says black and white. You can see it pretty quickly. That was the one thing I saw, and then I said, those windows are not traditional shape. Probably the best phrase for it. Instead of those things are crazy. No, I said they're not traditional shape. So go ahead and draw them in. Let's get them priced. The designer will draw other windows in there if you don't go that route before the plans are finalized, which is a distinction. If you do them after the plans are finalized, there'll probably be a charge. If you do them in this preliminary stage, after he's issued the plans, he's gotten the input, those weren't the only things we gave input about, which is one thing I put in there early. When you look at your plans and you have questions for the designer, make a list, get them written down, dictate them into your phone so you can translate it into a list. But having a list for the designer is very, very important. You go in there, you say you want these things, you give them a copy of the list, whatever works. We want these things done. When you get the plans done, look at your list, make sure everything that you asked to be done is done. And if it's not, why is it not done? Now, the designer may actually have a kind of a legitimate design question that he needed answered before he did it. 9 times out of 10, they go, oh, I forgot. So you go, okay, put it on there. The whole point, if you make a list, make sure that list is complete till you move to the next stage. And the list being complete could be talking through each one of the things that you gave the designer and having him explain why they're done or why they're not done. Okay? If they're not done for a particular reason, you keep them on the list, write that reason, get the answer to that question, and then move on. He either puts it on the plan or doesn't. But you got to nail those things down. I see too many people don't press for those lists to be complete. And it's not like you're going to hurt their feelings or anything. You're just kind of having the work be accountable and complete. So that's the way I look at it. Some designers like me and some don't. Okay, that's this plan here. Let me get to an engineering. Where are we? 11:20. Okay. Okay, you see the way this is the way I put plans in my files right here. This was the architectural right here. It's kind of labeled all by itself, and everything else has got ENG for engineering. So I can look at this and easily tell what the plan is. I don't have to open everything in my computer to figure out what I'm looking for. But the first thing that we look at is the foundation plan. That foundation plan tells me a heck of a lot, and it's not, as a builder, you understanding this plan is not nearly as important as the foundation guy understanding that plan. Now, a foundation guy will look at this, he'll know everything that's there, but this is basically the layout. The engineers decided where the load-bearing points are coming down from the roof. He's identified it on the foundation, and then he puts his beams accordingly. Okay? If there's something that has extra bearing weight and you need to thicken the slab to take that point load, those are little pads that were dug out bigger and deeper. And as a matter of fact, when the engineer came and did the pre-pour inspection, the foundation guys had not done one of these pads. Oh, they hadn't done this one up here. So he had to do that. And anyway, it was a lot of stuff. We got it done. The key is have your foundation, the engineer do a pre-pour inspection, sign off on it. He didn't sign off on it. He said this needed to be corrected. At 4 o'clock the morning of the pour, they were correcting this because they didn't show up the day before. We had all these flashlights on it and me standing there taking pictures. The good thing is I know this engineer. I've known him for 25 years. So I called him and said, we're not going to get this corrected until tomorrow morning. He said, okay, number one, I know you're going to do it. So take a picture of it and send it to me and I'll sign off on the foundation based on that. So there's lots of ways to skin a cat. So it was interesting doing it at 4 in the morning. But we did. So those are the kind of details they're looking in a foundation plan. All of this, I mean, they're just measuring these things out. These are little crossbars you put on what they call entrant corners. Any corner that goes into the house Here's an entrant corner here, another one here, where this is not an entrant corner, so there are no bars. But that's for the foundation class. I'm kind of getting off on that. Anybody have any questions about the engineering? Okay.
Maybe you could tell them a little bit about what Blue Sky does as an owner-builder consultant.
What the heck do we do? Well, okay. Well, Blue Sky does take owners that are going through projects like these through the whole process, step by step. As I've told folks that I sit down at a kickoff meeting, there's really no way for me to tell you everything you might need to know to build a house. But that's how I learned how to build a house. My dad gave me a plan. He said, I have a vacant lot in this neighborhood, go build the house. And that's what he did. He threw me off the end of the pier. But he was in the office next to me, so I came in and consulted with him about everything. So I did it on my own with his support. So I certainly got through that. But Blue Sky is the same way. You're wanting to build a house, so we're there to support you through the whole process. But again, the trick is to give you as much information as we can and enough that will also generate other questions. So that's why these handouts are good. That's why the glossary is good. That's why just getting in front of a plan and looking at it, if you're going to move into the next step, getting yourself familiar with that and the kind of things and questions that might come up. But we stick very close with all the clients as they start in the process. And looking at the plans is the first thing that we do in great detail. Thanks, Gail. Let me see, what else?
Maybe just for fun, you could show them the pictures you took last week at the site visit when they were framing that house that we've been looking at.
Oh, well, let's see. How could I find that?
It should be in if you go back from plans, go back to the owner builder. I mean,
Who they are?
The clients, and then Alice Lee.
Okay.
And then pictures. Current clients, Alice Lee.
I need to take out these. Okay.
Alice Lee. And the pictures.
Technical problems here.
Pictures. There you go. And there they are.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Yeah. Okay. Here's the real live thing. I don't know if you remember the elevation pictures, but they had really peaks all the way across the front. So here's the one in front of the garage, the middle of the house, over on the right side of the house, which is kind of the kids' area. And then you can see how high this roof is. See this kind of ridge spot right here? That's where the peak of the living room or family room is built inside the house. So, let's see. And I think this is the back one. Nope, that's either the client took this shot. This is standing out in the street. Again, this is looking at the thing to make sure the elevation really jives with what they have in their head about what they want the house to look like. I mean, I know that doesn't sound like real detail, but again, people know visual. They can relate to visual, especially when a house is in this stage. So when she was back on the street, she says, that looks just like it. And a week before, she had asked me, oh, they forgot these windows. So, well, they haven't built the dormer yet. So then a week later, she sends me this picture. She goes, they built the dormers. Good. So anyway, I like clients to interact with me on the progress like that. It's a real thrill, but it's starting to turn from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. All sorts of thoughts start to happen. Those thoughts are just fine, but verbalize them and talk about whether they're doable or not. I mean, some people want to change things. This is when the change order pandemic starts. All of a sudden they're hit with a desire to change things. But that does happen. I mean, it's an actual thing that once the 2 start turning into 3 dimensions, then those ideas start popping into the head. Let's see. Yep, here's that slab that we did at 4 o'clock in the morning. So we confirmed this is actually concrete they're putting in here. But here's actually the plumber's pipes, how he had to measure and put that powder room out in the middle of the house. Anyway, I'm getting off on foundations talk now. Yeah. Yep. When did we do this? It was probably, well, let's just say it was in the heat of the year. It was back at the hot spot. And yeah, do it as early as possible. The ready mix company was giving us fits about, yeah, we can supply you. And then a couple hours later, no, we can't. Yes, we can. No, we can't. So anyway, we said, give us everything you got at 3 o'clock in the morning. And they did. So, heck, they want to sell their concrete. Let's see what else we got here. Okay. Yeah.
Going through these drawings, from your 40 years of experience, like, are there particular things that we should pay extra attention to that are highest risk to have an issue during construction? Like, is it slab, is it framing, is it, not room left for HVAC to be routed? Or what have you seen?
Gosh. Yeah, you almost can't predict what's going to show up till you start putting it together. I say when you talk to the designer, just tell him what you want and let him do his thing. I rarely see it be too helpful with giving him input about what his thing should be. Until there's something to look at, it's all just so much back and forth. So if you have pictures, gather some pictures that you like, some magazines, different things like that, that will help. But the general layout of the house is going to be fairly easy to come up with anyway. I mean, you're in one of those lots with, well, you're not a rural lot, so it's not spread out. The house will be fairly compact. So there will be a, not preset, but there's little crazy creative stuff a designer can do with a house that's in a particular space. So that's a long way of answering, you just let him do what you're talking about. I think just the explanation of the layout you talked about yesterday, that's the place to start. Lay it out this way. They won't lay it out and say, this is it. They'll lay it out and send it to you and say, well, what do you think of this? They'll send it to me and say, what do you think of this? I said, well, you put the master bath in the front of the house, put it in the back. Something like that. Rarely does anything come up with this of any consequence. But they'll show you the layout first. You say, that looks good. Then they'll put the elevations on. And then once you got the layout and the elevations, then I can do a pricing. So once they do the elevations, they got the roof on there and everything else kind of falls into place. So, did it answer your question? You just tell him what you want. Yeah. Yes.
The points of like biggest risk you've seen in design. What are things? If you're going to watch for something in particular, is it a foundation? Is it a HVAC on the plan? Where are the points where they get it wrong the most frequently?
Well, I say, and I don't want to speak for every designer, but they're fairly oblivious to the fact that you do have to put air conditioning equipment in this house. Like that house I showed you with the east-facing windows, if you notice the roof was like this. Clearly, this side of the house is isolated from this side of the house. So I told the AC guy up front, we not only checked out the windows and whatever else it was, the positioning of the house, I talked to the AC guy. He said, absolutely, look at it. There's no way. I'm not going to give her that answer. I'm going to get the AC guy to tell me. He said, there's no way. So what we'll probably end up doing is put in mini split systems with ducts. Those are the Mitsubishi things that I call them hotel air conditioners, but they go up on the wall. The small ones, the mini splits, you can put them up in the attic and put the little condensers outside and then put a ducting system to it. So you'll have a little one over on this side, a little one over on this side, all up in the minor attic area that was put in this house. And the attic area was dictated by the design of the house. With the roofs like this on either side, and then you got a divider in the middle, you got to think about what you're doing. That's probably the biggest thing you run into, is has the designer put in room for the equipment that has to go in the house? Unless you're going to choose ceiling fans everywhere, and then you're okay. But most of the time you want a furnace unit up in the garage. Yes?
One of the things that we ran into also was, from a designer to an architect, there's a different amount of training involved. The creativity. Because we had a house plan, a design that we liked, and we just wanted to know if we were shooting ourselves in the foot anywhere.
Okay.
Tell us if this doesn't work, if it does work, if there's a reason why, or whatever. The designer, we went to several of them, and they did not have the creativity to be able to say, let's try something else. They just kept throwing us the same neighborhood house.
Yeah.
This is what, in every neighborhood, go to any neighborhood, look at every house, they threw us the same thing every time.
Yeah.
And we have a custom design,
Yeah.
and the designers just didn't have the skills to do it. So
Huh.
we went to an architect and had a fantastic experience.
Okay.
Honestly, the price was not that much different.
Okay.
It really
Hey,
wasn't.
those kind of finds are good.
For what he included,
Yeah.
he included the engineering
Everything.
Oh,
in his price.
I gotta get that guy's phone number. Okay. Well, that's a good success story. I like that.
And we did pay a little bit more to have 3D renderings. So
Okay.
we put the elevations and we could walk all the way around the house.
Okay.
In 3D before, and it cost a little bit more, but man,
Well
it
worth it.
saved it could have been a gotcha where we said,
Yeah.
man, this is butt ugly.
Yeah.
Why do I want to do that?
Right.
And now we know that it's what we envisioned.
Good. Those things help.
Yeah, a lot.
Those things help. And again, there is the 3D rendering, which is an extra expense. The drawing renderings are an extra expense too. So you just got to kind of look at what you think is going to make things come together for you. I do like the 3D rendering stuff. Pretty soon they'll come up with virtual tours of houses. Say, oh, you're thinking this? Boom, here, put on these goggles. And you'll see everything you're talking about. Now, I'm working on that. I haven't perfected it yet. So Elon might beat me to it. I don't know. But, the industry is changing all the time. And, 3D houses that they put out there, those are pretty cool. And I don't know many people that can afford them. But hopefully they'll work on that and get that in the mix too. So we can look forward to that. Any other questions? Anything in particular? Anything you want to look back at again? If not, dismissed. Thanks for coming, really.